Welcome to NTD Good Morning.
Here are today's top stories. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton denies any knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. Lawmakers will hear from former President Bill Clinton today.
Nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran conclude without a deal in place. What's next as speculation grows over potential strikes?
Netflix drops its bid to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery. The studio's board now saying it has received a better offer from Paramount.
President Trump planning to give everyday Americans access to the same type of retirement plan offered to federal workers. What that means for you.
And President Trump expected to award 3 Army veterans the Medal of Honor next week, the nation's highest military award.
This is NTD Good Morning, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here are Stephanie Cox and Carrie Dunst.
Good morning. Great to have you with us.
Today is Friday, February 27th. In today's top news, the latest on the Epstein files. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton saying she never met Jeffrey Epstein, telling members of Congress she had no knowledge of the crimes committed by the convicted sex offender.
NTD's Melina Weisskopf has the updates from yesterday's closed-door hearing before the House panel.
I don't know how many times I had to say I did not know Jeffrey Epstein. I never went to his island. I never went to his homes. I never went to his offices.
In a closed-door hearing Clinton described as repetitive, she insisted on having no knowledge about Epstein's crimes, admitting to casually knowing his one-time girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell.
I think we learned a lot. There were a lot of questions that we asked that we, weren't satisfied with the answers that we got, but we will continue to move forward.
Gomer said the full transcript of the closed-door meeting will be released 24 hours after it concluded. House lawmakers questioned the former Secretary of State about her knowledge of Epstein's ties to the Clinton Global Initiative.
Most of the questions that we asked about the Clinton Global Initiative, which were very specific questions, some of them were backed by emails and other documents that have been released by the Department of Justice. She said that she was a senator and you would have to ask her husband that tomorrow. So we have a lot of...
Ghislaine Maxwell told the Deputy Attorney General that she was friends with Bill Clinton, and the former president never went to the island where authorities say Epstein repeatedly abused minors.
I think it is fair to say that the vast majority of people who had contact with him before his criminal pleas in 2008 were like most people. They did not know what he was doing.
Flight logs and photographs show Bill Clinton flew on Epstein's plane in 2002 and 2003, and court documents stated that he went to Epstein's island.
How does someone with such evil infiltrate the highest levels of the U.S. government and world leaders?
Lawmakers say with millions of files and so many people involved, they expect the investigation to go on for a long time. Former President Bill Clinton will have his closed-door deposition later today. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
And the U.S. and Iran wrap up high-stakes nuclear talks without a deal.
Negotiations lasting for hours yesterday as the U.S. builds up aircraft and warships in the region. Here's more on that.
The threat of war remains after the U.S. and Iran concluded indirect negotiations Thursday in Geneva. Oman's foreign minister, who is mediating the talks, said there was significant progress in negotiations. Iran's foreign minister echoing that message in an interview with state television.
I can say that we made good progress after several hours of intensive negotiation. We have started serious discussions about elements of a deal, both in the field of nuclear issues and the removal of sanctions.
However, all parties walked away from the table without a deal in place. Before talks ended, Iranian state television reported that Tehran would demand to continue to enrich uranium and refuse to ship any of its enriched uranium abroad. Both are contrary to what President Trump has said he wants to see. Trump is pushing for a deal to constrain Iran's nuclear program as the country faces growing dissent at home. Iran maintains it has the right to enrich uranium and does not want to discuss its long-range missile program or support for terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. Vice President JD Vance weighing in, defending potential U.S. strikes if diplomacy fails. Vance telling the Washington Post Thursday there is no chance any strikes would lead to a drawn-out war. He said such strikes would be a deterrent to prevent Iran from pursuing a nuclear weapon, calling himself and President Trump skeptics on foreign military intervention. Oman's foreign minister says technical-level talks will continue next week in Vienna, the home of the International Atomic Energy Agency.
And for analysis on the boat incident near Cuba and U.S. oil sanctions on the country, we're pleased to welcome national security analyst Rebecca Grant. She's also the vice president of the Lexington Institute. Rebecca, thanks for joining this morning. As we just saw, Secretary of State Marco Rubio describing the boat incident as highly unusual, and Florida's AG there saying that Cuba has already changed their story multiple times. What do you think is actually happening in this incident?
Well, this is highly unusual. There have, over the years, been instances of the Cubans shooting first and asking questions later. But this story just gets crazier with every turn. We've learned, I think, that the boat was stolen from the Florida Keys. It's not a large boat, as Representative Jimenez told us. The Cubans, of course, are trying to make this out to be some mini invasion or terrorist act, but that's just ridiculous. I expect to see Florida and, of course, the State Department really trying to get to the bottom of who these people were, what happened, and then, of course, what has happened to the rest of the crew that may still be in Cuba. It is, however, a crazy incident. I think one thing is very clear, that this was not backed or planned in any way by the U.S. government.
Now, this happens amidst a whole bunch of issues, one being, of course, the Ukraine-Russia negotiations. Russia speaking out on this issue, you would think that they have no knowledge of it, being, very far from the Caribbean area, but they did bring up the humanitarian issues of Cuban citizens. Where might Russia fit into the Cuban regime's attempt to survive now that the U.S. has essentially reasserted the Monroe Doctrine and sanctioned all of the oil and, really put the screws, if you will, to the communist regime?
Yes, well, that's Russia for you. Any chance to jump on the propaganda. And of course, they know nothing about what was going on. I mean, Secretary of State Rubio was actually in the Caribbean when this incident occurred. But they'll lose no chance to put out their propaganda. And sadly, some people are kind of believing this. The Cuban government wants this narrative that the oil sanctions are oppressive and it's not humanitarian. I think President Trump and Secretary Rubio see the oil sanctions as part of the economic pressure on Cuba. That terrible regime, 100 miles from the best economy, the best country in the world, the United States, and there is Cuba continuing to suffer. Now, Rubio's also made pretty clear in his remarks after this incident that there's not military action imminent. They are trying to do an economic squeeze on the Cuban regime. And as you said, that includes oil. Cuba was getting about 100,000 barrels a day of oil, and now that has greatly, greatly diminished. And they're out of aviation gas, jet fuel.
And Rebecca, to pan back a bit, since you are an expert, of course, in matters specific to Russia as well as foreign policy in general, after Maduro's capture, both Cuba and Iran clearly weakened by the U.S. sanctions that have been happening. And then you take away the Venezuelan oil. India also agreed to stop buying Russian gas products. How does that put pressure on Russia and potentially China in terms of the peace process with Ukraine?
Well, putting oil pressure on Russia is what, everybody wants. The administration would love to see that. Unfortunately, they have to drive the price per barrel down pretty low. And Russia's done a good job of continuing to ship oil through its shadow fleet. Venezuela was involved in that. Iran was involved in that as well, as they shipped their oil partly by a shadow fleet that China purchases. So it kind of all does come back to China. The major purchaser there had been for Venezuela, still is for Russia, still is for Iran. It's really hard to put sanctions and squeeze Russia when China is continuing to backstop everything, and China is also continuing to purchase from Iran and to ship Iran chemicals to build ballistic missile rocket fuel. Pretty tough.
And the song kind of remains the same ultimately with Iran and their negotiations. Cuba, these regimes certainly don't cede control. What do you think happens over the next month or two as it relates to those two particular regimes?
And they're similar in that they've both been around a long time. They're terrible for their people. I mean, you can't imagine two worse economies than Cuba and Iran, but they are basically like mafia families. They're doing this to stay in power. We hate to see it. And that's why this complex economic pressure is there to try to get to a solution without military action. But certainly President Trump is ready for military action against Iran, to pressure that regime to agree to get rid of its nuclear enriched fuel that it shouldn't keep and to limit its programs. If that doesn't work, I think we see a strike. With Cuba, I think right now the policy is to continue the economic squeeze. But you know that a change in Cuba is a high priority for Secretary Marco Rubio.
And Rebecca, just in our last 30 seconds, your thoughts on the upcoming meetings. Obviously, Witkoff and Kushner met with Ukraine yesterday, but what might be the next material milestone toward any peace in Russia?
Witkoff and Kushner will keep at it. It's still about a land agreement. There's a great economic prosperity deal for Ukraine in the offing, so Ukraine will say yes, but it's all about getting Putin to say yes to a ceasefire, and sadly, Putin loves that war.
Yeah. More to come on that, of course. We always appreciate your analysis. Thanks, Rebecca Grant.
Thank you.
U.S. officials meeting with Ukrainian counterparts in Switzerland. Kyiv says Russia bombed multiple Ukrainian cities just hours before the talks. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the latest.
A U.S. delegation seen arriving in Switzerland for talks with Ukrainian officials on Thursday. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner are representing the U.S. The meeting in Geneva focusing on post-war reconstruction. Peace talks with Russia are a bit slow as Kiev reports that Russia pounded infrastructure and civilian targets across Ukraine overnight. Explosions lighting up the sky above Kiev overnight on Thursday. According to Ukraine, Russia launched over 400 drones and almost 40 missiles, injuring dozens of civilians and damaging infrastructure across the country.
It's very frightening. Should I leave for another country? I don't want to. Ukraine is my country. I've lived here all my life.
The Ukrainian side says Thursday's talks took place in two formats. First, the American side met with the Ukrainian delegation only. They later also held a trilateral meeting, which included officials from Switzerland. After the talks, the U.S. officials joined a call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who says he's thankful for President Trump's efforts to stop the fighting. Kiev says one of the main goals of Thursday's talks was to prepare for the next trilateral meeting with Russia, which should be as productive as possible. Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying the U.S. knows that the war in Ukraine does not have a military solution.
That war will be settled through a negotiation. And right now we are the only country in the world that can be a catalyst for negotiation. If we forfeit that role, no one else can do it.
Rubio also pushing back against claims that the Trump administration isn't doing enough to pressure Russia.
The administration continues to sell weaponry to Ukraine. We don't sell weapons to Russia, and we don't sanction Ukraine.
Zelensky says the next U.S.-led trilateral talks with Russia and Ukraine will likely take place in early March. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani met with President Trump at the White House yesterday.
That's right. It was the pair's second meeting since Mamdani's election last November.
Mamdani proposed a major housing plan asking the federal government to help build nearly 12,000 units in the city. His office says Trump was enthusiastic, calling it one of the largest federal housing investments in decades.
During the meeting, Mamdani also raised concerns about a Columbia University student who had been detained by federal agents. Trump reportedly promised her release and was asked to review cases of other students in New York.
Mamdani and Trump have emphasized cooperation on major city challenges, including crime, housing, and cost of living. This despite past political disagreements. And President Trump is planning to give everyday Americans access to the same type of retirement plan offered to federal workers, and his administration will match their contributions up to $1,000 per year. We heard about that at the State of the Union. Joining us to discuss is Jeffrey Tucker, a senior columnist with the Epoch Times and the founder and president of the Brownstone Institute, here with us nice and early this morning. Jeffrey, good to see you again. For people who might be struggling to save, is a $1,000 federal match would you describe it as some kind of helpful nudge from Uncle Sam, or are there perhaps other private options that they haven't tried out there that might be better?
Well, I like your phrase, a helpful nudge. Of course, everybody has the right to save and the opportunity to save. But the problem is that we have more than 50 million Americans who don't have anything like an IRA or a 401k or any other kind of retirement plan apart from Social Security. So this is a problem, and I think it's good that Trump has named it. The money involved is not significant, but I think what might really matter here is the idea of marketing it. If Trump can get it, if Trump can do it, and if anyone can, he can do it. Market these plans out to workers who mostly are on the poor side of the income spectrum. They are lower income. And they tend to be lean towards contract workers and minority populations and women who come and go from the workforce, and they just don't have any kind of retirement plans. And this problem is drives Trump crazy. I mean, he's a businessman, and he's thinking, look, you have a wonderful opportunity here to save lots of money and retire very rich, or at least well-to-do. Why aren't you taking advantage of it? So and interestingly, what Trump's proposing in the State of the Union address, and it was a very splashy announcement and very compelling, but it builds on a program that was actually pushed by Obama, but never really used and then abandoned, and then another one that was implemented by Biden. That is similarly not very well used. So the problem is not so much the absence of a program, but just the absence of marketing. So Trump's getting that done. $1,000 isn't a lot of money, but it's something, and it means something. There's a larger significance to this also that we could talk about.
Yeah, let's dig into that. What's the broader significance here, as you see it?
Well, this program pairs with Trump accounts that he's encouraging for newborn children to build up wealth that they can access when they're 18 years old, and not tax-free entirely, but tax-advantaged accounts called Trump accounts. He also talked about that, and other programs to build private wealth on the part of all American citizens. This is the drive. This is the purpose, to get everybody invested and make sure that everybody's saving money. The broader significance of this is shouldn't be lost on us, though. I think, and I have an article about this coming out, I think, today in Epoch Times. It was 1936 when Franklin Delano Roosevelt thought he would use the government to force everybody to save, and it would take care of everybody in retirement. That program is called Social Security, and we all pay taxes into it. And it worked for a number of generations where people were paid back a lot of money, and it seemed to be working. Of course, the program was established. It was never on a sound financial footing in the first place. It wasn't really savings. It was not really pay as you go. I mean, it was basically a pure transfer program from working age populations to retired populations. And it created a kind of a terrible dynamic. And now we're so late in this program's operations that so the returns on Social Security are a pittance, just tiny compared to what they would have otherwise earned in the markets.
There's certainly some bipartisan panic around that. Do you see this plan as an improvement on that, or another evolution of it?
I see this as an abandonment of an old mythology that government is going to be able to provide all the income its citizens need. I don't think anybody believes that anymore, and I think this is really encouraging. To me, it represents a kind of a sea change, one that is hardly ever talked about and not really noticed, but back in the 30s, everybody thought, in a kind of a socialist way, that the government was going to be able to take care of everybody from cradle to grave. Nobody really believes that anymore. So these are all these new efforts are entirely focused on the private sector as the path towards income security. That represents a massive and significant change in something like the ideological structure of income generation in the Western world. I think other countries are going to pick up on this. And to me, this is really interesting, really encouraging, and sort of philosophically significant. And it's left to Trump to kind of drive the point home. You know, the government can help a little bit, but ultimately it's up to you, and it's up to the private sector, and it's up to the free market of the financial sector to provide you the income and wealth that you're going to need to have a good life. And I think that's a really important message and a big change.
Certainly representing some kind of cultural shift, as you're pointing to, potentially. Do you see any drawbacks here?
Well, you know, we have yet to see the way these retirement accounts are going to work. It was just a speech, and we don't have the legislation yet. There's a question about how much there's a fiscal outlay is going to be involved here, if any. If it operates as a kind of a pure rebate on taxes, or that you get to add an additional $1,000 of income you have tax-free, and that's what he's calling a government contribution. I think that would be the right way to go here, so that the government's not actually spending money. On the other hand, if it turns into a pure subsidy, then we've got a problem. There is another issue here, which is I would rather see a full wall between the financial markets, individual savings, and government. Like, I think government should stay out of this entirely. That's my own philosophical outlook. But I guess in some sense, that ship has sailed about 90 years ago. So we're not in that world. So we're not entirely where I would like to be, which is just to leave it up to the freedom of individuals to decide entirely. But I do think that the Trump's language and this, we'll see what the ultimate legislation looks like, but it does seem to be a step in the right direction that I think is understandable. I think it's even meritorious and doesn't really have any kind of grave dangers, so long as they keep the fiscal outlay for this program minimized and emphasize tax rebates and tax deductions instead, which I think it likely will.
Well, I look forward to reading more in your article today in the Epoch Times. Thank you so much, Jeffrey Tucker. Good to speak with you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Sounds great on paper, right? That everybody gets the same retirement benefits and, what the federal government workers get. But it seems like it's a step in the right direction, yeah?
Yeah, we'll be watching that closely. And up ahead, the plaintiff in the social media addiction trial taking the stand yesterday, telling jurors she created around 10 YouTube accounts by age 10 and describing how chasing likes and followers began to impact her sense of self-worth. We'll be hearing more about that very soon. Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. Netflix is walking away from its bid to take over Warner Brothers.
The Warner Brothers Discovery Board now saying Paramount has submitted a superior offer.
In a statement, the co-CEOs of Netflix said the deal is, quote, no longer financially attractive. Paramount announced earlier this week that it had raised its offer for all of WBD to $31 a share.
It also attached several deal sweeteners that appealed to the board, including a $7 billion regulatory termination fee. Yesterday's announcement brings an end to the bidding war that's been going on since last fall.
Now to the social media addiction trial unfolding in Los Angeles. Jurors yesterday hearing directly from the plaintiff, the 20-year-old, testifying how her social media affected her mental health. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more from the courthouse.
Jurors heard from the 20-year-old plaintiff, Kaylee G.M., and her testimony started off by her attorney showing pictures from her childhood, such as photos from her previous birthday parties, pictures with her parents, and horseback riding. But the testimony quickly shifted to her social media use. Kaylee testified she started watching YouTube just 6 years old. By the age of 8, she had created her own account, entering a random age in her profile. She posted videos and closely tracked likes and subscribers. She told jurors she had about 10 YouTube accounts and posted more than 100 videos by the time she was 10. She said she even created additional accounts and asked family members to create accounts to boost her likes, comments, and subscribers. She also testified that around that same time, she had about 15 Instagram accounts. She said she used outside apps where she would like other people's photos and in return receive more likes on her main account. When asked whether she became addicted, Kaylee testified she would sneak onto her phone in the middle of the night and at school to constantly check likes, comments, and followers. She told jurors, "Whenever I got a bunch of likes, I was really happy, and when I didn't, I felt insecure, like I looked ugly. It messed with my self-worth." She testified that even when she was bullied online, she continued using the apps because being off social media felt worse than the bullying. Kaylee also said that when her mom took her phone away, she became anxious and depressed, and at times threatened to harm herself, telling jurors, "I wanted it back because I felt like a huge part of me was missing." She also testified that from a young age, she frequently used beauty filters and at one point had edited almost all of her photos. She told jurors she relied on filters to feel better about herself and has since been diagnosed with body dysmorphia. Kaylee is expected to testify through Thursday afternoon and possibly into Friday. The YouTube CEO is expected to testify sometime next week. Reporting from downtown Los Angeles, Christina Corona, NTD News.
Thank you, Christina, for that report. And the Missouri State House of Representatives passed a bill yesterday that would remove the expiration date on the state's ban for transgender athletes.
This is after the General Assembly passed a law in 2023, and that banned transgender athletes from competing. But that was filibustered by the Democrats, and that led to the 4-year expiration date.
The law gives authority to the state's education and higher education departments to establish enforcement mechanisms. But neither department has created such rules.
Now, the bill heads to the Missouri State Senate for consideration.
Next, the Justice Department is suing 5 more states: Utah, Oklahoma, Kentucky, West Virginia, and New Jersey.
It's accusing them all of refusing to provide full voter registration lists as requested under the Civil Rights Act of 1960.
The DOJ said the Attorney General has broad authority to demand statewide voter rolls for inspection and analysis to check for improper registrations. The Department's Civil Rights Division has now filed complaints against 29 states and the District of Columbia over voter roll access.
And according to the lawsuit, Utah officials cited privacy concerns and provided only a redacted public version of the list. Similar allegations were made against the other 4 states. Attorney General Pamela Bondi said accurate voter rolls are essential to election integrity. Officials in the 5 states did not respond to requests for comment.
A federal judge is allowing the Trump administration to continue construction of a $400 million ballroom at the White House. The National Trust for Historic Preservation had sued to stop the project from moving forward. President Trump welcomed the decision, calling it great news for America. Trump took to Truth Social, saying construction was ahead of schedule and under budget. The president adding that the new ballroom would, quote, stand long into the future as a symbol to the greatness of America. The White House announced the new ballroom project over the summer. The White House says the construction of the 90,000 square foot space is being funded by private donations, including from Trump.
And police have made an arrest in connection with an organized snowball fight that took place in New York City on Monday. The NYPD and the city government are divided on how to deal with the incident. NTD's Sean Marshall has more.
In what started out as a social media organized snowball fight at Washington Square Park in New York City turned ugly when police responded to a call for disorderly conduct. NYPD released information about an arrest made of a 27-year-old man Thursday morning out of one of the suspect's photos that were posted to social media. New York City police said officers were hurt when they were pelted with snow and ice during the massive snowball fight. NYPD says the suspect was previously arrested less than 3 weeks ago for an attempted robbery in the transit system. The New York Police Department said in a brief social media post, the man was arrested for assaulting our officers. A spokesperson for the department said it did not immediately have additional information, including what the man was charged with. The department said multiple officers were hit in the face with snowballs, and a spokesperson for the union has said 2 police officers were treated at a nearby hospital for face, head, and neck injuries. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
Prosecutors declined to charge Guzman Koboli with assault, instead slapping him with obstructing government administration and harassment, both lesser charges.
He is not asked to enter a plea and was released pending his next court date in April. The president of the New York's police union said the decision not to charge him with assault sends a message to officers that the mayor does not have their backs. And 3 Chinese scientists are off the hook after the Justice Department charged them with smuggling biological materials into the country. Their lawyers say the Chinese regime helped to tip the scale. NTD's David Lamb has more on that.
In a criminal case against several Chinese nationals, American defense attorneys say the Chinese regime intervened and helped get the case dismissed. The Justice Department charged 3 Chinese scientists with smuggling materials, mostly tiny, transparent, round worms from China into the U.S. Attorney General Mamdani says the government must be vigilant when foreign nationals try to advance a malicious agenda. The 3 were in jail for more than 3 months while the case was pending, but a judge suddenly dismissed the charges on February 5th. The scientists then traveled back to China. Their American defense attorneys say they were told there was intervention by the Chinese consulate in Chicago and that its involvement, quote, moved the needle. One attorney said, "We get this phone call saying China is negotiating with the U.S. over these 3 students. Serious talks." According to the DOJ, all 3 men were research scholars holding visas and were temporarily researching at the University of Michigan Laboratory of Xinjiang, commonly referred to as the Shanshu Laboratory. DOJ says that in 2024 and 2025, 2 of the individuals received the materials, which had been shipped from China, and that the university initiated an investigation in which the 3 refused to participate, at which point they were terminated by the school. David Lamb, NTD News.
And the U.S. Attorney's Office in Detroit said it would not comment on China's role or the government's retreat. An email seeking comment from the Chinese consulate in Chicago was not immediately answered by Wednesday.
Next, the FAA is imposing temporary flight restrictions near Fort Hancock, Texas, citing special security reasons.
This comes after multiple reports say that the military accidentally used a laser to shoot down a drone operated by U.S. Customs and Border Protection near the southern border. NTD could not independently verify these reports.
In a joint statement, the Department of War, CBP, and the FAA said the engagement took place far away from populated areas and there were no commercial aircraft in the vicinity.
The statement said the incident occurred after a seemingly threatening drone was seen flying within military airspace. Democratic lawmakers are raising concerns about coordination between the agencies.
The flight restrictions are in place through June 24th, prohibiting pilots from flying in the designated area. The FAA says the flight restrictions do not impact commercial flights.
Up ahead, a new book exposes horrifying claims of forced organ harvesting in China. Prisoners of conscience allegedly killed on demand to supply transplant patients. Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. I'm Carrie Dunst. If you're just joining us now, here are today's top headlines. The latest on the Epstein files. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton says she never met Jeffrey Epstein, telling members of Congress she had no knowledge of the crimes committed by the convicted sex offender. House lawmakers questioned Clinton behind closed doors yesterday. The full transcript will be released in the next 24 hours. Former President Bill Clinton will sit down for his closed-door deposition later today. And in the social media addiction trial unfolding in LA, jurors yesterday heard directly from the plaintiff. The 20-year-old woman testified how social media negatively affected her mental health during childhood. She told jurors that she had about 10 YouTube accounts, 15 Instagram accounts, and had posted more than 100 videos by the time she was only 10 years old. The CEO of YouTube is expected to testify sometime next week. And Iran and the U.S. ending nuclear talks in Geneva without a deal, despite mediators saying they did make significant progress. Iranian state media says Tehran will continue enriching uranium, rejecting key U.S. demands. President Trump is pushing for limits on Iran's program, while Vice President JD Vance says that any potential strikes would not lead to a drawn-out war. Those are this morning's top headlines. With that, Steph, over to you.
Thank you, Carrie. And after the Cuban regime says 4 people aboard a U.S. registered boat were shot and killed by its Coast Guard, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. is investigating and will have answers soon. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has that story.
It's highly unusual to see shootouts in open sea like that. It's not something that happens every day. It's something, frankly, that hasn't happened with Cuba in a very long time.
The Cuban Communist regime says its Coast Guard shot and killed 4 people and injured 6 others on board a boat that entered its territorial waters on Wednesday. The regime claims that when its Coast Guard approached the boat, the occupants started firing weapons and the Coast Guard returned fire. Cuba also says the boat is registered in the U.S. and claims that the individuals were planning to infiltrate Cuba and commit acts of terrorism. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that his department won't base any conclusions on the information the Cuban regime has revealed.
We will verify that independently, and as we gather more information, then we'll be prepared to respond accordingly.
The Florida Attorney General says that communist Cuba can't be trusted and, quote, I've directed the Office of Statewide Prosecution to work with our federal, state, and law enforcement partners to begin an investigation. Florida Congressman and Cuban-American Carlos Jimenez says that the U.S. can't take Cuba at its word.
I don't trust the Cuban government in anything. I don't trust anything that they say. Their story has already changed. And so we need to find out exactly what happened.
Jimenez says that the Cuban regime claimed that the individuals were traveling in a speedboat, and that's not the case.
It is a 24-foot open fisherman with one 300-horsepower engine, and you got 10 people on it. It's not going to go very fast. And so the original story was that they were transporting, it was human, smuggling, and now that they're terrorists. So again, they're changing their story.
Rubio says the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the U.S. Embassy in Havana are all investigating.
We have our embassy on the ground in Havana working this as we speak, asking for access to the people that were on those vessels, if they were American citizens or permanent residents. According to the Cuban regime, that the boat was registered in Florida. We're tracking that down. We will know shortly.
Rubio says that he's confident the U.S. will know the whole story soon. Jason Blair, NTD News.
And joining us now with analysis on the situation is Brandon Weichert. He's a senior national security editor at 1945.com. He's also author of The Shadow War, Iran's Quest for Supremacy. Brandon, always great to have your analysis on this topic, Iran. What's your understanding of the meetings held yesterday?
Oh, I think they were for show. The meetings, the negotiations are not real. As I've been saying, the Trump administration, President Trump himself, has decided he's going in. It's a question of when, not if. And the big when is when the USS Gerald R. Ford is fully cleared of the bilge, shall we say, and is back into full position off the coast of Israel. The objective will be for the Ford to provide an air defense screen for Israel and any U.S. bases nearby that would be targeted by the Iranian missile fusillade that will occur after bombs begin dropping on Iran, which I think could happen. I mean, the March 2nd is Purim, which is the Israeli holiday. So sometime thereafter, you could see the bombs dropping.
Brandon, Iran, in their own media, as we saw in that last package, said that they're planning to continue to enrich uranium. It doesn't seem like they're trying to do much, considering Trump's track record of doing what he says in these military situations. Are they not even trying at this point, and are they preparing for war? Or are they attempting to potentially find some way to prevent the U.S. from taking military action?
Well, I think they're doing exactly what we're doing, which is they're using the negotiations to buy time to build up, in their case, defenses against what they perceive to be the inevitable airstrike. Right now, this is sort of like the Bulls kind of jockeying for better position on the ring before they go at each other. I don't believe either side is serious about negotiations. We keep saying it's about the nuclear program, but then we say, well, it's about the ballistic missiles. And then we say, well, no, it's about the support for terrorism. And so ultimately, there's no consensus here and no consistency. And I've always believed that the Iranian regime can't be negotiated with. I just don't think right now we can afford a war. And I think this war could really, contrary to what people are saying in D.C., could really do damage to President Trump's legacy. We could even lose an aircraft carrier in the process of this thing.
Brandon, the Democrats are attempting to prevent Trump from moving forward with anything without congressional approval. Does Iran's military capability, as you're describing, make it harder for Trump to move without Congress? Because it can't be a prolonged war without congressional approval.
Yeah.
And Iran, is Iran factoring that into these negotiation calculus where they're just sort of not even attempting to look like they're looking to play ball with Trump?
Well, the Persians are very savvy, so I'm sure they are, yes. At the same time, politically, President Trump needs greater cover. I would actually, if I were advising Trump, say I would look at this as a blessing in disguise, because what's going to happen is we're going to go into Iran. It's going to kick off, a major crisis in the region, possibly a wider war that involves China and Russia against us. We're going to possibly lose a carrier. And then in the process, the Democrats are going to be sitting in the wings waiting to say, see, I told you so. He's not the anti-war president. We have to impeach him. Politically, I think Trump would actually benefit from getting a greater degree of congressional involvement.
How might that affect timelines?
Would certainly delay any ability for him to drop the bombs. The key thing here is the president wants the Israelis to go first. He wants them to go first so that then we can be seen like we were last year as coming in and mopping up whatever the Israelis couldn't get. But I don't think the Israelis want to go first now, because I think they're worried about, well, will the Americans have our back? So there's this sort of internal dialogue going on between all sides on this thing. And I think it just shows you that right now, this is probably not the best time to do this. I think the United States should focus on restoring the economy at home and rebuilding the defense industrial base. As you know, the Joint Chiefs of Staff said recently, if we get into a protracted war with Iran, we will run out of supplies in 4 to 5 days. This is not a good time for Uncle Sam right now.
A lot to look out for. Seems like right on the precipice of some type of change. We'll always appreciate your analysis on this. Brendan Weicker, thanks for joining.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jason. And Afghanistan and Pakistan are trading strikes as tensions escalate there.
Pakistan's defense minister saying the two countries are now in open war.
The Afghan Taliban saying Pakistan today struck several provinces, including the capital, Kabul. Pakistan says it's responding to unprovoked attacks from its neighbor to the west.
The violence follows explosions in Kabul that Taliban officials blamed on Pakistan. Earlier this week, Pakistan conducted strikes deep inside Afghanistan.
The Taliban said yesterday it had captured several Pakistani army posts. Pakistani officials say their response inflicted heavy casualties and destroyed multiple Taliban posts.
The flare-up jeopardizes a fragile ceasefire between the two countries that's been mostly holding since the fall. Afghanistan does not formally recognize the 1,600-mile border between the two countries, known as the Durand Line.
And shocking new book details what researchers are calling a horrific crime by the Chinese Communist Party.
In the book, Killed to Order, American thought leaders host Jan Jekielek traces what he describes as 2 decades of mounting evidence pointing to a state-run transplant system that targets prisoners of conscience and religious minorities. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the book.
Author of Killed to Order, Jan Jekielek, says he first realized the crime of forced organ harvesting was real back in 2006. He learned about it through a couple of channels. One was a report from a whistleblower in China.
And she alleged that there was a camp of sorts, a concentration camp, where people, Falun Gong practitioners, were being held to be killed to order for transplants, basically.
Her husband had been a surgeon who was having nightmares due to all the operations he performed.
After their organs were harvested, their bodies were thrown directly to the incinerator without any trace left.
Another report involved a head of the transplant surgery department at Tel Aviv University, Yaakov Levy.
He had a patient who had been waiting for a heart transplant for a long time. And one day his patient told him, and I was chilled to the bones as Yaakov was recounting this to me. In 2 weeks, he was going to get a scheduled heart transplant. And from the perspective of, Yaakov had been the head of the Israeli Transplant Association at one point, right? He said, that's impossible. There's no way, because you would know when someone's going to be killed. But the guy went and got the transplant and came back to Israel.
Yakelik says for such a system to function, a state actor would need the power to heavily propagandize the public, dehumanizing a targeted group, and the ability to incarcerate large numbers of people.
Maybe 1 million, okay? So this is what the Chinese Communist Party did with Falun Gong practitioners back in 1999 and 2000. Okay, this was spiritual discipline. The government estimate was that 70 to 100 million people were doing it. It was very grassroots, very different than very hierarchical communist structures. And the dictator at the time, Jiang Zemin, decided to use his words, eradicate it, okay? So a group of people practicing truthfulness, compassion, forbearance were suddenly, on the most wanted list. And to justify that, they pushed this mass propaganda into the population to justify to their fellow man.
The American Thought Leaders host says once the persecution and mass incarceration happened, then came the blood typing, tissue typing, and organ scanning.
And so before 2006, there were actually ads online that would say, for $200,000 or $150,000, you can get a new heart in 2 weeks, right? It's just kind of unbelievable thing to see, right? But why can that be done? Because the so-called donor is ready to be killed to order, already matched to you, right? The moment you pay that cash, they find the right person, they ship that person, and they kill that person to order. This is a whole different level.
Yakelik says the CCP, as with all communist regimes, has a history of designating an external enemy, the United States, as well as internal enemies, in order to cement its hold on power.
And there's two purposes to this. One is because they want to somehow suppress this group or get rid of it. The other thing is it's a message to the rest of society. This is what the Communist Party can do. Don't get on the wrong side of us, okay?
He also points to recent research by Matthew Robertson and Jacob Levy analyzing Chinese transplant literature.
From about 2,000 and some papers, they found 70 or more violations of the dead donor rule in the published public research, okay? What does that mean? That means that the way that those 70 people, or in those 70 research studies, the way people died was their organs being extracted. They were murdered by having their organs extracted, and they wrote that into their research methods, okay? And the reason they wrote that, this is now my opinion, the reason they wrote that into their research methods is that is by far the predominant way in which transplantation has been happening in China for the last 25 years. So people don't know any other way, and they don't even fully realize that what they're doing is murder.
Killed to Order details alleged early experimentation on Uyghurs in Xinjiang and raises concerns that detainees held in labor camps may now be subjected to forced organ harvesting. Yakelik warns other religious and ethnic minorities, including Tibetans and underground Christians, could be targeted as persecution intensifies. Killed to Order is set for release on March 17th and is currently available for pre-order. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Coming up, the Supreme Court has more hot-button cases coming up for oral argument in the next several months. We'll take a look at some of the most compelling cases.
And President Trump expected to award 3 Army veterans the Medal of Honor next week, the nation's highest military award.
Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. The Supreme Court is poised to hear arguments on major constitutional and legal issues over the next several months.
NTD's Arlene Richards breaks down some of the top cases.
In the coming months, the Supreme Court will hear some tough issues, including the constitutionality of President Trump's birthright citizenship policy and the arrival dates for mail-in ballots. Birthright citizenship.
Ending birthright citizenship, which now comes to the fore.
On April 1st, the 9 justices will hear arguments over whether or not Trump's executive order to withhold citizenship from the children of illegal immigrants complies with the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment. The clause guarantees citizenship to people born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof.
that we've understood for more than 100 years, well over 100 years, to say that it doesn't matter what the status of your parents are. If you're born in this country, then you are a citizen of this country.
That was meant for the babies of slaves. It wasn't meant for people trying to scam the system and come into the country.
Trump says the clause doesn't apply to mothers who are in the country temporarily or unlawfully, and if their fathers likewise are not legal citizens.
It has created this perverse incentive for people to come here illegally, and if they have a child, then at that point that child would be a citizen under that interpretation.
The president is guessing that the court will rule against him. He said in a recent post that the court would likely rule in favor of China and other nations and allow them to make a fortune. In April, the court will hear the arguments that will ultimately lead to a ruling that either supports Trump's immigration policy or upholds a potential misunderstanding that's been followed for decades. Mail-in ballots. On March 23rd, the High Court will consider whether states can count mail-in ballots received after Election Day. The Republican National Committee and others alleged Mississippi violated a federal law by allowing mail-in ballots to be counted as long as they are received within 5 business days after Election Day. A lower court said it's illegal. Several states adopted the mail-in ballot rule in 2020 during the COVID pandemic.
State after state after state, anti-integrity voting groups sued state after state to get rid of all the safeguards.
Mississippi has argued that an election is the conclusive choice of an officer. The committee has warned that allowing states to change the law could cause chaos and flip the results of an election. A decision is expected before the upcoming midterm primaries. Other top issues coming up include gun rights for drug users, asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border, and the potential cancer risk of Monsanto's weed killer. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
And the White House says President Trump will award the Medal of Honor to 3 U.S. Army veterans next Monday.
Master Sergeant Roderick Edmonds was a prisoner of war during World War II. He'll be posthumously awarded for his actions inside the prison camp.
Afghanistan war veteran Staff Sergeant Michael Allis will also be posthumously awarded for his acts of gallantry above and beyond the call of duty.
And Command Sergeant Major Terry Richardson, a retired Vietnam War veteran, he will receive an award for his bravery during the Vietnam War. He saved the lives of 85 of his fellow soldiers.
The Medal of Honor recognizes service members who demonstrate extraordinary bravery and risk their lives above and beyond the call of duty. And a telescope has captured a new image at the center of the Milky Way.
For astronomers, the discovery is shedding light on how stars and planets form in an environment similar to our own solar system. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the details.
Our planet is 26,000 light years, or about 150,000 trillion miles from the heart of the Milky Way. This week, the European Southern Observatory released images of the star-forming gases at the center of our galaxy. Steve Longmore of Liverpool John Moores University describes what the images show.
So what we're looking at is the very cold, dense gas that's spinning around the supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy. So this is the sharpest and widest view we've ever had of that gas.
Clouds of gas and dust surround the massive black hole at the center. Astronomical data scientist Ashley Barnes explains the significance of the discovery.
This is interesting because we see these filaments in different colors, and we see the colors separated, which ultimately means that the molecules, the chemistry, the physical conditions of the region vary across the galactic center on small scales, which is very interesting for understanding star formation and ultimately what the conditions of the gas which are forming these stars is.
Longmore says by studying how stars are born, astronomers can learn more about how galaxies evolved.
The big picture, how the gas is spinning around the center, tells us why stars are forming here and why they're not forming over here. And that's a big piece of the puzzle that we need to understand why star formation and planet formation is different in the early universe than it is in the present day.
Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
Well, as you know, Steph, I'm not much of a science guy, so I do have to cheat a little bit here, but it's quite significant. You saw in that last shot all of those satellites side by side. So the images are captured by a network of 66 of those in Chile. And that's produced the largest and most detailed image ever of what you'd call the CMZ, almost like the CBD. It's the center of the Milky Way. And that area is supposedly the most turbulent space in the galaxy. There's a big black hole there, which is, of course, a very dense and ominous bit of matter.
Sagittarius A.
Okay.
Apparently.
Proceed. Yeah, you got something.
Yeah, looking at all that cold cosmic gas, you'd think, exposing it would just blast open the mystery, but it just makes it even more mysterious, I think, and even more beautiful. Those images, just gorgeous.
Yeah, I think Einstein said something like that, right? The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Socrates as well said something to that effect.
All right, well, this weekend, just be sure to take a look up at the night sky. There's even more happening there.
I like this. You don't need a bunch of 66 satellites.
Right.
Just use your eyes and
That's
look up.
It's
going to be a remarkable celestial alignment. It's set to unfold Saturday. Astronomers call it a planetary parade.
And that's when multiple planets appear to line up in the sky at once. Now, while they're not arranged in a perfect line, their proximity creates the visual effect of alignment.
Now, according to NASA, 6 planets will be visible this weekend. You've got Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. Those can be seen purely with the naked eye, those 4, under clear skies, of course.
Uranus and Neptune will require binoculars and telescopes. Viewers should look approximately 1 hour after sunset toward the western horizon, away from city lights and away from obstructions.
Planetary groupings of this size are relatively uncommon. There was one last year, but doesn't happen frequently. Now, scientists say this phenomena reminds us that, as in centuries past, simply looking up remains one of the most direct ways to observe our place in the solar system.
And what a nice reminder, and quite humbling, isn't it, sometimes when you get to I don't get out of the city too much, but it's always a lovely reminder.
Yes, if you're going to plan to try to see this, it's recommended that you, as you point out, try to get away from a lot of light pollution and go somewhere where you can get a very nice view of the sunset, because you're going to want to look toward the western horizon. And supposedly just after dusk, that should be like your best opportunity to see it. So just before it's like fully night, that window. So, but of course, check the weather, because if you're in an area that's going to have cloudy skies, then it won't be worth planning your whole day around it. But I did check the weather. Most of the country does seem to be clear, but
Bring your thermos.
That's right.
And your blanket and your good cheer.
If you got binoculars, you'll get the bonus 2 planets too, but you don't need to have any visual aid.
And start with Venus and Jupiter, because they'll be the brightest ones, and then you've got Mercury in there coming a little less bright. So, but if you get the last few, then that's pretty good. If you got the equipment, go for it.
Sounds like a great way to cap off a Saturday, right?
Yeah.
And transition into your Saturday evening. Well, look, if you have any feedback on the show, or maybe you've got another planetary thing you would like to see us cover, we won't know unless you shoot us an email. So please do that at goodmorning@ntd.com. We'd love your feedback.
And for round-the-clock original news coverage, watch us live at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. I'm Stephanie Cox.
I'm Carrie Dunst, wishing you a wonderful weekend.